I funded my brother's entire medical degree and discovered he was presenting himself on social media as a specialist. He is not giving medical advice to thousands. I found out when a patient arrived in the ER following his advice. What I did was not only a family decision. There are moments in the emergency room where the information a patient gives you changes category mid-conversation. It starts as clinical history, and at a specific point it becomes something different. Something that forces you to finish attending to the patient in front of you with all the concentration that requires, while simultaneously holding somewhere in your head information that is going to require all your processing when you leave that room. The patient's name was Miriam. She was 42 years old. She arrived with a decompensation of her thyroid condition that was in principle manageable, but that could have been avoided. When I asked whether she had modified her medication, she told me yes, that she had reduced the dose according to a recommendation she had seen on an Instagram profile of a doctor who explained that standard doses were often excessive for certain patient profiles. I asked for the name of the profile. She told me, and the name of the profile was the nickname I had given my brother when we were 8 and 5 years old respectively, and that nobody else used. My name is Isabella. I am 38 years old. I am a specialist physician in emergency medicine, and I have spent 12 years working in a public hospital where the shifts are long and the cases are what they are, and where I have learned that medicine is practiced with what you know and with the honesty of recognizing what you do not know. My brother's name is Diego. He is 34 years old. He studied medicine because from the age of 15 he said he wanted to be a doctor, and I, who by that point was already in my residency and who had no parents who could fund him, decided that if there was anyone in this family who could make that possible, it was me. 6 years of medical school, 2 years of internship and social service. The first 18 months of his pediatrics residency while he found financial stability. Nearly a decade of systematic support. Diego was a general physician with 18 months of pediatrics residency still in progress. He was not a specialist. He did not have the experience the profile described, and he had 147,000 followers. I finished attending to Miriam. We adjusted her medication. I explained what had happened. I asked her please not to modify any medical indication based on social media content regardless of who published it, and I followed up with her endocrinologist. Miriam left in good condition. She might not have left in good condition. That was what kept turning over in my head as I finished the shift. I searched for the profile from my phone before leaving the hospital. The nickname was there. The profile photo was Diego in a white coat in what appeared to be a consultation room. The biography read, Specialist Physician in Integral Health and Preventive Medicine. Over 10 years of clinical experience. Online consultations. Diego had 8 years since finishing medical school. 18 months of residency in progress. 0 certified specialties. 0 years of independent practice because he was still in training. 10 years of clinical experience. I scrolled through the profile for 20 minutes in the hospital parking lot. What I found in those 20 minutes was enough for me to know that what I had in front of me was not a wording error in an Instagram biography. It was a profile built systematically over at least 2 years with medical content presented as specialist advice, with charges for online consultations, with follower testimonials describing having followed his recommendations for conditions that required real medical follow-up. Hypertension, type 2 diabetes, thyroid conditions like Miriam's, medications, doses, modifications to treatments prescribed by other doctors. With 147,000 people reading it as if it were true, because Diego presented it as true. That night, I did not call Diego. What I felt was too much for a call that could have any useful result. I called my friend Carmen, who is a health law attorney and who has spent years working at the intersection of medicine and law. I described what I had found. Carmen listened with the attention of someone who immediately recognizes the category of what they are hearing. When I finished, she told me 2 things. The first, what Diego was doing had a legal name, and that name was a legal practice of medical specialty with the aggravating factor of charging for services and potential harm to third parties. That, depending on the jurisdiction and whether there were documented cases of harm, the consequences could range from medical board sanctions to criminal liability. The second, that I, as a certified physician who had knowledge of this, had a particular position before the medical board, and that position implied a responsibility she was leaving me to process, but that was real. I told her I knew. She told me to call her tomorrow when I had slept. I did not sleep well that night. What I processed in the hours I did not sleep was not only the anger. It was something more complicated. It was the superposition of two images of Diego that could not both be true at the same time. The Diego I knew, the younger brother who had worked hard to get into medical school, who had spent nights studying in the apartment I rented, who had told me on multiple occasions that he wanted to be the kind of doctor who really helped people. The Diego of the profile, a person who had built over 2 years of false professional identity, who had charged for consultations he was not qualified to give, who had published medical recommendations that could and apparently had negatively affected the health of real people. Those two images could not both be true at the same time, and yet both were true. I called Diego at 7 in the morning the following day. I told him I needed us to meet that day. He asked if everything was okay. I told him no, that we needed to talk in person and that it was urgent. We met at 2 in the afternoon at the apartment he had been renting for a year. When he opened the door and saw my face, he knew the conversation was not ordinary. I did not ask. I showed. I opened the profile on my phone and held it in front of him. I told him a patient had arrived in the emergency room the previous night with a decompensation from having modified her thyroid medication following a recommendation from that profile. That patient had given me the name of the profile. That the name was the nickname I had given him when he was a child. That I had reviewed the profile for 20 minutes in the hospital parking lot. That I knew what it was and what it was not. Diego said nothing for a time. What he did was sit down, and the way he sat down told me there was no surprise in him. Only the weight of someone who knows that the moment has arrived, that somewhere they knew was going to arrive. What Diego told me over the following hour, I am going to say without filter, because this does not seem like a story that needs to be softened to be processed honestly. He had started the profile 2 years ago as general health outreach, without any claim of specialty, just information. At some point, he had started receiving direct questions from followers. He had answered. The followers had grown. Someone had suggested he offer online consultations. He had started charging. And at some point between the beginning and the 147,000 followers, he had made the decision that the biography describing his real profile, general physician in residency, was not going to generate the trust that the version he had built generated. So he had built the version. I asked him at what point he had thought about the people who were following his advice. He told me he had always thought that what he published was general information and that the ultimate responsibility was the patient's to consult with their doctor. I told him Miriam had consulted with him, that he was the doctor she had consulted, that the ultimate responsibility had not gone anywhere else. Silence. I told him what was going to happen, not as a threat, as information about what I had decided needed to happen and that he needed to hear before it occurred. The profile had to be closed that day. The online consultations had to cease immediately. I was going to file a report with the medical board because I had knowledge of a situation of improper professional practice that had resulted in harm to a patient, and because my status as a certified physician put me in a position where not reporting it was also a decision with ethical and potentially legal consequences for me. That what the board decided to do with that was the board's and not mine to control. That if there were patients who had suffered documentable harm from following his advice, that could have additional consequences that I could not and did not want to protect him from. Diego asked me whether that meant I was going to ruin his career. I told him he had put his career at risk when he built that profile, that I had put nothing at risk, that what I was doing was what corresponded to do when you have information about harm to patients. He asked whether I could give him time to close the profile himself before I made any report. I told him he had until 8 that evening. At 7:53, the profile went inactive. I filed a report with the medical board the following day with Carmen. The file included screenshots of the profile, the biography, the posts with specific medical advice, the evidence of charging for consultations, and the anonymized description of Miriam's case as an example of documented harm. The board initiated an investigation process. Diego was summoned. The process lasted 3 months. The resolution included a formal reprimand in his professional record, a prohibition from engaging in any medical outreach activity on public platforms without supervision from a certified physician for 2 years, and the obligation to complete training in medical ethics and responsible health communication. It was not a resolution that ended his residency. It was a resolution that went into his record and that he's going to have to explain when he applies for his specialty certification. The relationship with Diego exists. It is different. There were 3 months where we did not speak. Not because I decided to cut him from my life permanently, but because I needed time to process the distance between the brother I knew and the person who had made those decisions for 2 years. When we resumed contact, it was with an honest conversation that included something I needed to say and that I had not said in the moment of the confrontation, because in that moment it was not the time. I told him what had cost me most was not the anger about the risk to patients, though that anger was real and was justified. It was that he had built all of it during the same years. I had supported him with the belief that I was helping him become the kind of doctor he had said he wanted to be, and that the person who had built that profile was not that doctor. Diego had no response to that, and sometimes the absence of a response is the most honest response someone can give. What I want to take from this story has 2 parts for different audiences. The first is for anyone who consumes medical content on social media. Always verify the real certification of whoever gives you medical information. In Mexico, you can verify the professional license of any doctor at the National Registry of Professionals portal of the SCP. In other countries, there are equivalent registries. A verifiable license number, a registrable certified specialty, an institution where they practice that you can confirm. If that information is not available or not verifiable, the medical content that person publishes does not have the backing it appears to have. Do not modify any treatment prescribed by your doctor based on social media content without first consulting whoever prescribed it. The second part is harder and is for whoever might be in a situation similar to mine. When the person causing harm is someone you love, the question you ask yourself is not whether to act. The question you ask yourself is whether the love you feel changes what corresponds to be done. And the answer, though it hurts, is no. Love for someone is not a reason to let the harm they are causing continue. Sometimes protecting the strangers being affected and loving the person affecting them are 2 things you have to hold at the same time. It is possible. It is one of the hardest things I have had to do, but it is possible. If this story impacted you, comment. Do you verify the real certification of the doctors or health professionals you follow on social media? Like if you believe false medical content on social media is a real public health problem. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who follows health accounts on social media and has never thought about verifying who is behind them. Practical tip. In the United States, you can verify a physician's license and board certifications through your state's medical board website or through the American Board of Medical Specialties at certificationmatters.org. If someone presents themselves as a specialist, ask for their board certification number. That is different from and additional to a general medical license. A general practitioner does not have board specialty certification. That distinction is the difference between backed medical information and content that can harm you.